Charles, it's an honor to have you on Follow the Money Weekly Radio.
Jerry, it's absolutely great to get a chance to speak with you, and thank you for introducing the dollar meltdown, because the year that just ended in 2011, what were the best performers in 2011? It wasn't the Standard & Poor's 500, which it ended literally flat unchanged. It wasn't the Dow, which maybe showed 5.5%. The biggest performers last year were gold and oil. And as you know, and your audience knows, we're very, very early in the process of currency calamity that the Fed has created. And even so, the performers already are the things that you're talking to your listeners about.
One of the things that caught my eye, Charles, about your book, first of all, was the fact that you had several key names on here that I think all of us in the Austrian school, or those who kind of believe that you can't fix debt with more debt, I saw a lot of their names on here. Jim Rogers, Lou Rockwell, who runs the Ludwig von Mises Institute, and then, of course, Ron Paul, who basically called this book a must-read. And so it certainly caught my eye. And then I also noticed that your book came out in 2009, about the same time ours did. And I think both of us, I'm going back and revising mine now, and I noticed as I opened your book, you said the federal debt was just under $10 trillion when I began writing. Didn't it feel like you were trying to nail Jello to the wall when you were writing that book?
Yeah.
Especially now. I mean, can you believe since 2009 it's gone from under 10 to now over 15?
It's incredible, and you're right. This is the slipperiest thing of all. It's even more slippery today than it was before, because now, when they raise the national debt ceiling, it used to be, they raised it, and they'd raise it by $800 billion or $500 billion or $1.2 trillion or whatever it was, and now they raise it in kind of a hidden smokescreen, obscured package of incremental steps. You're right. I have a book coming out in March, and when I completed the manuscript, I had to talk, instead about what the national debt was, I had to talk about the presumptive national debt ceiling. In an age that demands clarity, insight, understanding, and clarity, the way that Congress is managing our fiscal affairs becomes more muddled with each passing day.
Well, and I think, Charles, and you do point this out rather well in your book, and I do want to talk about your new book, your latest book that's coming out next year, early next year. But I want to bring out and point out that you do a great job, especially in the early parts of this book, explaining that it's not necessarily a Barack Obama phenomenon that we went from 10 trillion to 15 trillion, because underneath George Bush from 2000 to 2008, we went from 5 trillion to 10 trillion. So instead, it's an overall Washington, D.C. problem. Elaborate on that just a little bit.
Yeah, it is. And it's a question of how long reasonable people like us, and by us I mean the American people, I'm not talking about the political classes or the governing classes, but how long do they think we can go along deficit financing the warfare state and the welfare state? It was a very clever game when they first started creating it, because it enabled them to buy votes and to, pass the expenses on to children that aren't yet born. But you can't do that forever. At some point, the money runs out, and then once the money runs out, you still may have a credit line, but eventually the credit line runs out, and that's what we're faced with now. So they have stretched this rubber band as far as it will go, and the consequences are very, very ugly for the American people.
I'm in one of those camps that I really can't win, because I want less government, and the conservatives think that I'm a liberal, and the liberals think I'm a conservative. You face similar problems?
Well, of all of my life.
Right. Am I speaking your language?
I mean, people have to understand, George Bush came into office with special favors for the steel industry, and he left office with the largest bailout of the bankster classes in the history of the United States of America. So this is how we manage government responsibly. This is the party that needs to be chosen for their fiscal sobriety. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. And they promise that they're going to still love you in the morning. If you just vote for them in November, they will love you and they'll be faithful to you. But it's an old game, and we, the American people, are responsible for it. We have taught the political classes for a couple of generations, this is how the process works, that you get elected and you get reelected and reelected and are reelected by giving the people things, by spending money that we don't have. And I'll tell you, Jerry, I call it the American piñata. And it's like this. The whole game involves getting the big stick, which is the presidency, for example. And so you have the national news media. They're like the mariachi band that plays festive music, tries to keep the spirits high, and then the big stick is passed around, and, one party wins, and they pass the big stick to their supporters and the people whose affection they were able to buy with bills, and those people get a chance to whack at the American piñata, and they hope to spill a few goodies on the ground, and then they dive down to the ground and start grabbing up the goodies that they knocked out of the piñata. And then the big stick, we have a big national election, and the mariachi band keeps playing, and the big stick gets passed to the other party. And the other party passes the stick around to their supporters, and they whack the American piñata some more. And it's all great fun except for one thing. The piñata does not survive the bashing, and that is what they have done to America. For generations now, it's been about passing the big stick around and getting the most goodies you can out of the government.
That's an interesting way to look at it, an interesting illustration. I haven't thought about it that way, but that is exactly what's happening. And as you look at the current crop of Republican candidates that are up there, we do see Romney, who many people feel is the most electable. We also point to Rick Santorum, and then, of course, Representative Ron Paul down in Texas, where I'm from. You obviously have a persuasion, because you're cut from this Austrian school as such as we are, that Ron Paul represents in many ways the most conservative and most likely radical move back towards the Constitution. What are your views on Ron Paul? Why do you support him as a candidate?
I had a conversation with somebody the other day. He said to me, well, I think, Romney would be a good candidate because of his business background, his experience, and, we have economic problems in this country, and he's a man who's proven that he can yada, yada. But I said, look, I've known Ron Paul for a long time, and I admire him. He is a man without peer among elected office holders in this country. But I tell you, I would not hire Ron Paul if I were going to do a leveraged buyout of Apple Computer Corporation. I would, because he doesn't know how to structure mezzanine financing, create, a good package of subordinated debentures. That's not his business. I might hire Romney for something like that. But we are steeped in this country deep in a currency crisis. We have a global fiat money calamity unfolding in slow motion before our very eyes. The dollar reserve standard around the world that has been in force effectively since the end of World War II is melting away. It's ending as well before our very eyes. And so you would think that you would want somebody to head up the affairs of state that knows a thing or two about monetary policy, about the history of currency and credit, knows something about, and who demonstrably knows about this stuff. Let me see. There was one fellow in Washington that was warning us about all of this, the panic of 2008, the mortgage meltdown, the housing bubble, warned us about all of this stuff in advance. And so when the powers that be, Republicans and Democrats alike, and the Federal Reserve decided to do something about it, they turned to people who had not seen it coming. And this is the same sort of dilemma with somebody like Romney. He doesn't have a clue about these macroeconomic issues and about the nature of money and credit and the nature of the currency calamity that's unfolding before us. He might be really, really good at mezzanine financing and a corporate takeover. That's his area. Maybe he could go back to that.
Right. Well, and as you look at the debates that we've seen, to ad nauseum, we've seen these debates surrounding Iran, gays in the military. They've talked about, the homosexual, the marriage amendment. They've talked about some of these issues, which we hear about every single debate. But Charles, what's amazingly missing from this is the trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars that the Federal Reserve pumped into the global economy. And I haven't even heard the question asked on the stage. How can that not be at the center of all this debate?
They are so shallow, and they are obsessed with the horse race aspect of the campaign. You remember earlier during the campaign where a crowd of reporters were shoveling and pushing and shoving voters in New Hampshire aside, roughing people up, frankly. And some reporter, I think from CNN, said, Congressman Paul, what about, the lady there was, if she shook your hand, she would have supported you, but you didn't shake her hand. This meaningless stuff They're obsessed with this. It's as though America is a sporting event. Do they talk about the Federal Reserve acting as the central bank of the entire rest of the world, and the disclosures that you have to wring out of them like pulling teeth about $7.7 trillion that they made available here, and trillions to private companies and foreign banks that they made available there? Do they ask about these things, all of which Ron Paul has warned them about? Do they ask about those things that fundamentally impact our freedom and our prosperity? No. They ask him about what the size of his campaign budget will be in the state of Florida. It's unbelievable to me.
To me, it almost seems like, when are we going to have another Ron Paul, somebody who comes from that greatest generation, who understood sacrifice and is willing to take on this nation? Who wants to lead this thing now? I mean, it is a mess. And he is here. He's willing to lead. And you see the population saying, yeah, but he doesn't want to bomb more countries. Are you serious? I mean, it really makes you wonder about the future of our nation. And considering that, I want to dive into the second part of your book, because what I love about your book is that while you do spend half of the book explaining the problem, which is very important because you can't understand the solution, you don't even know what the solution is until you know what the problem is. You have to know what the equation is before you know the answer. So you do provide the equation. You say, here's the issues. But then you spend the last half of the book saying, and literally it's called What to Do. And that is the question on everyone's mind now. And I want to go through briefly your thoughts as we move into 2012 on many of these. We can go rapid fire, or we can take a few minutes and discuss them, but I want to first tackle your views on gold. You do talk about gold as being a safe haven. What are your thoughts for investors investing in gold in 2012?
I think they ought to take advantage of the depressed prices. You know, one of these days, not too distant in our future, nobody will really care what the price is in terms of dollars. They will just want some. In other words, instead of saying, I have so many dollars worth of gold, people won't even be using the dollar as the benchmark against which their investment or their holdings of gold. They will simply refer, the dollar will be irrelevant. They will simply refer to how many ounces of gold they have. So, I mean, I think it's imperative that every family should have some gold. And I'll put it this way. The world is constantly, the multinational organizations and the bureaucrats that have us into this swamp, they're constantly looking at new monetary schemes. The head of the World Bank came out with, well, we're going to have to get a monetary scheme that involves gold somehow as a sort of a benchmark or an indicator. Believe me, the only thing they're trying to do is get ahead of the curve. They don't want gold because it disempowers them, but they know that the American people are beginning to wake up. And Jerry, I've described it this way, that it's just like the story of the three little pigs, except in reverse. At one time in this country, we lived in a house made of bricks. And in fact, they were gold bricks, and it was a gold-based monetary system. And the authorities said, we're going to take all of your gold bricks. You're going to have to move now, and chased us into a house made of sticks. And we moved into this house made of sticks. It was the dollar reserve standard, the Bretton Woods standard, and we moved into that. And it wasn't as good as a brick house, and we lived in it until it started falling apart in 1971, and we went fleeing. And they said, well, we're not going to be in this fixed dollar exchange rate dollar standard any longer. We're going to be in a simple dollar standard, the dollar pegged against nothing, the dollar redeemable in nothing, just a flat-out fiat dollar system with no pretense of any redeemability. And they chased us into a house made of straw, and now we're in a house made of straw, and the winds of economic reckoning are blowing, and the American people are beginning to figure it out, and they're starting to long nostalgically for returning to our solid brick house. And here comes the head of the World Bank recognizing this and saying, maybe we need a gold-based monetary system. Well, if it ain't real gold that you hold in your hands, that you can redeem paper for, that you can hold, keep, take, it is another crock of invented, delusional monetary system instituted just to quell the public's apprehension. And I'm sure they have something like that on the drawing boards now as this crisis deepens.
Well, and I can envision some of these gold commercials that you see on Fox News or CNN or just any channel nowadays, and you see them talking about gold and how you need to have gold. And then inevitably when you call into these places, you're talking to some 18-year-old kid who just got out of a meeting that says if the more that you sell this particular coin, the more money you're going to make. And so people often get the bait and switch, and you really draw that out in your book. Explain why bullion is a better protector against hyperinflation than numismatics.
Yes. Let me put it to you this way, and I've seen people just left tearful when they find out they've made a substantial investment in gold, and gold prices have doubled or quadrupled, and they're still behind the curve. They're still in a loss position after years of powerful moves in gold because some salesman looking to pay off his mortgage and send his kids to college at their expense lied him into buying the wrong thing. It comes down really to this. In a currency crisis, in an economic calamity such as lies dead ahead for us in the United States, when you need the staples of life, the things of survival, when you need to provide for yourself and your family, you're going to have a very, very hard time convincing the person that you need to acquire those from that he should take one coin instead of two if his price is two, because the one coin you're offering, somebody who collects coins likes that date. He's going to want the